valuable, and some of you got to get back to work. I'm not going to hurt my feelings if you have to leave. So I'm going to keep this very brief since I am late. We are running short on time, and basically focus in on two things, I guess, at the institution that, since y'all are from the chamber, that you might be interested in, more so than the specifics of breast cancer and breast care and that kind of thing. Just real briefly, I went to Davidson College in North Carolina. Hey, is that working? I'm a native of Newport News, Virginia, and my people have been in Virginia, Gloucester, Matthews in 1721, so I love the state of Virginia. I did my medical school training at MCV in Richmond and my surgical residency down in Charleston at the Medical University. So one of my interests is breast cancer. I'm a member of the American Society of Breast Surgeons, which is probably our best society as far as promoting surgical breast care. But like I said, I'm just going to hit a couple high points. The first thing is, when you think of breast cancer, the numbers would say that it affects 1 in 9 women, so you can imagine that it's a pretty big health concern in this country. If you take out the high-risk individuals, the number's actually more like 1 in 25 and 1 in 30. So when you see these advertisements that, well, there's a 1 in 9 chance you're going to have breast cancer, it's really a skewed number because it includes people who are at high risk. So if you take those individuals out, your actual risk is much less. But it's still a big concern. Now, the good news is, from about 1990 to 2005, that 15-year period, we saw a 1% increase in the cure rate per year. So during that 15 years, we saw about a 15% cure rate increase in breast cancer overall, taking all stages of the disease. And people said, well, why is that? And I think really the conclusion was, and there's a number of reasons, but the main reason was screening. In other words, we were catching things earlier. And the main tool for screening breast cancer, as the women in the audience know, is mammography. And so that's been the really big change in the cure rates of breast cancer. We've just found things earlier. It's not complicated, it's very simple. We found things that probably would have been breast cancers before, but we found them before they were actually true breast cancers, and we were actually able to stop the process. So how does that play out here at Southern Virginia? Well, about 2 years ago, maybe a year and a half ago, we got digital mammography. And for all the women in the audience, if you're going to get mammograms, you really should go to an institution that has digital mammography. And I said the other night, imagine watching a football game on high-definition television and then going back and watching on the television set you had 15 years ago. It's hard to watch the game, actually. But that's what digital mammography does. It allows us to see things that we could never see before. Plus, it's like any computer. You can manipulate the images, zoom in on things, reverse contrast. So it's allowed us to pick up things that literally we would have never seen before. And by being able to do that, we can pick up things that could be a problem earlier. And that's really what's influenced the cure rates. So when you think about Southern Virginia, we've got the same mammographic digital mammography equipment that you'd have anywhere in the state, practically. And I think that our radiology techs do a very good job as far as delivering the service. I've heard many, many times where women say, well, I went to Richmond and they really squeezed my breast and it hurt, but then I came here and it was a pleasant experience. So I think that that's a feather in our cap right now, and so I've been very pleased that we've had that. So you don't need to go to Richmond or anywhere else because we've got just as good techs and the equipment's just as good. So that if you take away anything from this talk, it would be that, number one, you have to get your mammograms, and number two, get them at a facility that has the digital mammography. So we have that right here at home. But the other thing I'd like to discuss, after being here about a year, we looked at our data, and it was interesting when we looked at the breast biopsies that we did and the positive biopsy rate. That is, if you do a biopsy, what % of people have cancer? The national average should be about 15 to 20%. So if you do 10 biopsies, 1.5 people should have cancer. The others should be benign. And when we looked at our numbers were like 75 to 80% of our patients that we biopsied had cancer or a pre-form of cancer. And so we were like, well, that can't be right because, just because you live in Emporia doesn't mean that you've got an 80% chance of having breast cancer. And sifting through the data, probably one of the big factors involved in that skewed number is the fact that the people in the community are probably not getting screened with mammography effectively like they should. And so about a year ago, Rosemary Prince, who's our office manager, we sat down and we said, well, how can we get this out to the community? And so we looked at a couple of different things, maybe going to the foundation, because Mike Anderson had said that they might have some funds to promote mammography in the community. Rosemary had another source, which is a grant that we could apply for. We'll be applying for that this spring. Apparently we kind of missed the deadline, and then Marilyn came to the office earlier this week, and she said, well, these are all the other resources in the community that I didn't know of. And so I think the thrust right now is going to be, how do we get all these volunteer organizations, national organizations, the foundation, any type of grant funding that we can, to put together a program where we can, number one, educate the community, because I think that's going to be a big part of it, and number two, actually maybe provide some funding for individuals who would otherwise not get their mammograms because they felt like they couldn't afford it. So I think that resource is out there, and that's going to be one of our big thrusts. I think that would be very good for the hospital, but more importantly, it'd be really good for the community. And I would like to think that after doing that, a couple of years, we would see our positive biopsy rate, come down more towards the national average. So those are just the two institutional things here that might apply to you guys as far as the chamber and just knowing, what we have here and how it affects the community. And once again, I'm very sorry that I'm late. I know it's an abbreviated talk. I'll be glad to field any questions. If anybody has any questions about where we are and where we're headed. Yes, ma'am.
I heard recently that a man can get breast cancer also. Is that true?
Yes, it's very rare. I told the folks the other night at the senior circle, I've seen 2 of those cases probably in the last 4 years, and I've seen probably over the last 14 years of practice, maybe 4 of them. It's very rare, and that just has to do with the anatomy of just men don't have that same ductal tissue, the amount of ductal tissue. 2 of those individuals had high-risk factors where they probably had some genetic predisposition, but you can get it. It's usually picked up pretty early just because the self-exam is a lot easier in men, obviously. The screening, we still use mammography and ultrasound. When we diagnose it, we use the same surgical biopsy techniques. The treatments are all the same. Treatments are all the same mainly because no one has done any large studies using men, so we just adopt all the treatment that we've developed in women over the last 34 years and apply it to men. So, does that answer your question? All right. Well, I know y'all want to get back to work, and I apologize for being late. Maybe another time we can set this up when Marilyn's got me hog-tied, so I can't be somewhere else and not on call and that kind of thing. So, once again, I appreciate your time, and sorry for being late.